Story time. George's Marvellous Medicine by Roald Dahl. Chapter 1. Grandma. I'm going shopping in the village, George's mother said to George on Saturday morning, so be a good boy and don't get up to any mischief. This was a silly thing to say to a small boy at any time. It immediately made him wonder what sort of mischief he might get up to. And don't forget to give Grandma her medicine at 11 o'clock, the mother said. Then out she went, closing the back door behind her. Grandma, who was dozing in her chair by the window, opened one little eye and said, Now you heard what your mother said, George. Don't forget my medicine. No, Grandma, said George, and just try to behave yourself for once while she's away. Yes, Grandma, said George. George was bored to tears. He didn't have a brother or a sister. His father was a farmer, and the farm they lived on was miles away from anywhere, so they never had any children to play with. He was tired of staring at pigs, hens, cows, and sheep. He was especially tired of having to live in the same house as that grisly old grunion of a grandma. Looking after her all by himself was hardly the most exciting way to spend a Saturday morning. You can make me a nice cup of tea for a start, Grandma said to George. That'll keep you out of mischief for a few minutes. Yes, Grandma, said George. George couldn't help disliking Grandma. She was a selfish, grumpy old woman. She had pale brown teeth and a small puckered-up mouth like a dog's bottom. How much sugar in your tea today, Grandma? George asked her. 1 spoon, and add no milk. Most grandmas are lovely, kind, helpful old ladies, but not this one. Nah. She spent all day and every day sitting on her chair by the window, and she was always complaining, grousing, grouching, grumbling, griping about something or another. Never once, even on her best days, had she smiled at George and said, Well, how are you this morning, George? Or, why don't you and I have a game of snakes and ladders? Or, how was school today? To be honest, she didn't seem to care about any other people, only herself. She was a miserable old grouch. George went into the kitchen and made Grandma a cup of tea with a tea bag. He put 1 spoon of sugar in it and no milk. He stirred up the sugar well and carried the cup into the living room. Grandma sipped the tea. It's not sweet enough, she said. Put more sugar in. George took the cup back into the kitchen and added another spoonful of sugar. He stirred it again and carried it carefully into Grandma. Where's my saucer? She said. I'm not having a cup without a saucer. George fetched her a saucer. And what about a teaspoon, if you please? I've stirred it for you, Grandma. Stirred it well. I'll stir my own tea, thank you very much. Fetch me a teaspoon. George fetched her a teaspoon. When George's mother or father were home, Grandma never ordered George around like this. It was only when she had him all to herself that she began treating him badly. You know what's the matter with you? The old woman said, staring at George over the rim of a teacup with those bright, wicked little eyes. You're growing too fast. Boys who grow too fast become stupid and lazy. I can't help it if I'm growing fast, Grandma, George said. Of course you can, she snapped. Growing's a nasty, childish habit. But we have to grow, Grandma. If we don't grow, we'd never be grown-ups. Rubbish, boy, rubbish, she said. Look at me. Am I growing? Certainly not. But you did once, Grandma. Only a very little bit, the old woman answered. I gave up growing when I was very small, along with other nasty, childish habits like laziness, disobedience, greed, sloppiness, untidiness, and stupidity. You haven't given up any of those things, have you? But I'm only a little boy, Grandma. You're 8 years old, she snorted. That's old enough to know better. If you don't stop growing soon, it'll be too late. Too late for what, Grandma? It's ridiculous, she went on. You're nearly as tall as me already. George took a look at Grandma, and she certainly was a very tiny person. Her legs were so short that they had to have a footstool to put her feet on, and her head only came halfway up the back of the armchair. Daddy says it's fine for a man to be tall, George said. Don't listen to your daddy, Grandma said. Listen to me. But how do I stop myself growing? George asked her. Eat less chocolate, Grandma said. Does chocolate make you grow? It makes you grow the wrong way, she snapped. Up instead of down. Grandma sipped some tea, but never took her eyes off the little boy who stood before her. Never grow up, she said. Always down. Yes, Grandma, and stop eating chocolate. Eat cabbage instead. Cabbage? Ugh, I don't like cabbage, George said. It's not what you like and what you don't like. It's what's good for you that counts. From now on, you must eat mountains of cabbage. Lots of it, and if it's got caterpillars in it, so much the better. Ugh, George said. Caterpillars gives you brains, the old woman said. Mummy washes them down the sink. Mummy's as stupid as you are, Grandma said. Cabbage don't taste of anything without a few bald caterpillars in it. Slugs too. Not slugs, George cried out. I couldn't eat slugs. See you again tomorrow.